Hi, I'm Andrew McCrae. Welcome to our farm and ranch in northwest Missouri. My great-great-grandfather settled here in 1910, and I'm the fifth generation to grow crops and livestock here. As a farmer myself, I know the highs and lows of this life, the issues we confront every day, some new, some as old as farming itself. This show is a place to talk with farmers and others in the ag industry about topics that mean something to us, topics that can improve the present and future of our operations. This is Farming the Countryside. Welcome to Farming the Countryside. Joe Caffey joins me. Joe is president and CEO of First State Bank in Middlebury, Indiana, and they certainly work with lots of farmers and agricultural businesses in the northern part of Indiana, and I suppose across the border end of Michigan and elsewhere. Joe, I appreciate you being with me today.
Hey, it's good to be back, Andrew. I always enjoy our time together.
Yeah, I do as well. Let's jump right into things. I know that this would not be unique to your bank. I'm sure a lot of banks that handle a lot of farm and ag loans this year are seeing balance sheets turned in, especially for row crop farms, corn and soybeans, that are break even at best. A lot of them have negative numbers. Maybe I should just start with that. I suppose that's the case, and that doesn't necessarily mean operators are bad operators. That's just the nature of this year. Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, that's accurate. The past few years, we've been pretty fortunate that many of the producers in this part of the world and across the Farm Belt have been in positive cash flow situations. And so, as we project here at the beginning of the planting season, project on down the road to harvest season, and we talk through those income statements and balance sheets, we certainly are seeing break even in the best of worlds. In fact, if we see traditional row crop operators turning in those income statement projections with a big positive, we are having some conversations about how they're going to do that and get there. So yeah, that's almost par for the course this year.
So if somebody turns in one that says positive, you're suspicious, it sounds like.
I don't know if suspicious is the right word, but our lenders are taking a deeper dive into that and finding out how they think they're going to be positive, and then is that information we can give to other farmers who are struggling to get to that point on their projections.
So you're obviously in the business of lending money, and you've got to get that loan back. So how long, and I know it depends on the person you're lending to, but how long can you continue to turn in balance sheets that are negative? Because that doesn't mean the bank gets repaid eventually.
Well, you're exactly right. It does depend on the operation or the business that you're lending into. And so at First State Bank, we really try to take a broader view than just 1 year as a snapshot and picture of time. That year is very important, but we often will look at a 3-year average of cash flows because you know as well as I do, we've got a lot of farm operators in this part of the world who are still sitting on grain from last year. They're still sitting on oil seeds from last year. And so their marketing bleeds over into multiple years, as does the buying of inputs. And so if you take that broader view and a 3-year average of cash flow, I think it gives you a more accurate picture of the management of the operation in general. Now, the challenge becomes when you put together two of those negative actual cash flow years in a row, it takes longer to work out of that cycle. When you're looking at a 3-year average. But at the end of the day, we still feel that's a better picture of what's happening at that particular farm operator.
I think we'd all agree that, yeah, margins are tighter, but still of those balance sheets you see come, through the bank, are there certain operators that have a better looking balance sheet? And then my question is why? What is it that they consistently do that makes their balance sheet better than some of the other operators? What can we learn from them?
There's definitely differences in balance sheet from operator to operator. I think one of the things that the operators do who maybe are going to weather this storm in a little stronger position than those who may not is they match up their assets and liabilities. In other words, if they're buying a piece of equipment, they're not financing that with a mortgage loan over 20 years. They're financing that with an equipment loan over 5 to 7 years, or maybe even shorter. They're not carrying those longer term assets on a line of credit. They're using that line of credit appropriately to pay for inputs, pay that line of credit back down as they sell crop. And so keeping those assets to liabilities matched up is pretty critical, especially in tight cash flow situations.
We have been in a period of higher interest rates than what we had experienced, for several years before. We've been in that now. How much is the added interest expense on balance sheets impacting those operators now?
There's no doubt that it's impacting cash flows along the way. And I think the last few times that you and I visited, we talked about visiting with lenders to try to lock in some of that lower interest rate money. And so some of those farm operators out there who did that definitely have an advantage. Now that may not be as true on operating money. That money has definitely gone up. And so some of our very best operators are tapping their lines less because they had a ton of equity or a ton of cash and capital they could use for inputs for the coming season.
Those operators then that had enough equity, has that kept the land and the rental market strong in your area, or have you seen any weakening in any of those prices?
I don't think we've seen any weakening. I don't think we've seen any strengthening. It's maybe found a plateau, if you will. We still have a lot of influence from other industries, people wanting to invest in land in this area. And then also those folks who want to purchase larger tracts, break it into smaller tracts to build farmettes and whatnot is definitely impacting it. There are still some farm buyers out there. Some of our best operators have decided not to invest in real estate over the last 18 months. And they are pretty happy that they didn't invest that down payment right now, I think.
You mentioned that they didn't invest. So why is that? Do they believe that we're just in a time in which these balance sheets will erode and so they need to keep enough working capital and equity, or why are they deciding not to make the purchase now?
I think a little bit it's the fear of the unknown. In those particular situations, they were able to work with some other investors that enable them to still cash rent that land, so they didn't give up acreage base necessarily. They just didn't feel it was a good time to invest in a long-term asset that they felt maybe there was a bit of a bubble. That's yet to see if that was the correct decision or not, but it was a decision that was made.
What are folks doing then on shorter term assets, not land? So equipment, building bins, those types of things. I'm guessing that's slowed down. What are you seeing?
We have seen a slowdown in that, and oftentimes we don't always get involved in the financing of the equipment, as the equipment manufacturer has a lot of reasons to do it at lower interest rates that we can afford to, but we haven't seen a lot of that pop up on balance sheets along the way this season.
One of the things that we always want farmers to do is to be progressively minded, but sometimes you can be progressively minded and, in a sense, leave your bank behind, or they begin to get skittish about this. In fact, I think I mentioned to you that last week's guest talked about this, that he'd become very adept at growing some specialty crops and had end users in mind, but his bank got nervous and wanted to do something different because there were not as many guarantees, or maybe they didn't understand the market as well. What do you say to farmers that want to be progressively minded, but they may be in an area that the bank doesn't understand as well? It doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but how do you deal with those customers? Because those should be good customers.
Exactly. If you have a long-term relationship with that customer, we certainly want to work with them to understand what they're trying to do. And so I would encourage producers who are looking to expand into different markets with different product segments, or vertically integrate in a market that they already understand. Make sure your lender understands that along the way. And so a really good example of that, in our part of the world, we have a lot of poultry production here. So several years ago, a new organic poultry, or ultimately egg production company came into this market who we didn't know and we didn't understand. We asked the first few producers to get us in touch with that ultimate that integrator, and so we met with that integrator. They were kind enough to let us briefly see their financials, so we better understood what was happening. But if you go into the bank or credit provider after the fact and say, "Hey, guess what I did?" it's a little bit too late to have those conversations. So several months notice, a year's notice before doing those things is really helpful, so the bank can engage their credit department and learn with the producer along the way. We certainly are open to producers gaining new streams of income as long as we understand what's going on.
You mentioned those different streams of income other than an off-farm job. So we're talking just farm right now. Is there any one place that you find some of your producers going for added streams of income, or trying to diversify the income stream to help their balance sheet?
You know, there's still those who look to livestock integrators to do that, to diversify on-farm income. Outside of that, we don't have any new specialty crops necessarily in this part of the world that are gaining a lot of acceptance.
The poultry is big though in your area, correct? And
It
eggs
is.
production.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know that you mentioned before the RV business is pretty important to the community there too. Usually there's an RV rolling down the street behind you when we do these interviews.
Yeah, 80% of the recreational vehicles in the world are produced in our county, most of which the factories are a stone's throw from one of our offices. And so that's really important. As interest rates have risen, I think some of the unknowns that come with the supply chain as Washington, D.C. gets involved in some of those things has maybe made the RV industry a little more cautious. I just read this morning that deliveries this month are up 14% from the prior month. The belief amongst some of the manufacturers that I talked to is that maybe some buyers are trying to stay ahead of the tariff pricing that's coming down the road.
Let's jump into some of those bigger national and global issues. Tariffs, of course, are one. I'm just interested in what you hear within banking circles, what you're hearing from customers. I think it's obviously on people's minds, but are we too early into it to really know the impact yet, or where do you see things heading?
I do think we're at the forefront of it and probably too early to understand the impact. There's definitely concern in banking circles about what it's going to do, especially to our manufacturers who rely on imported goods and products along the way. Our local representative in Congress, Rudy Yakum, serves on the Ways and Means Committee, and so he's kind of involved in this. And he was on a farm in our market here last week talking about that. And I don't think the Ways and Means Committee fully knows what's going to happen yet, but they're still saying, that we want this to be a win-win for agricultural producers along the way, and that you're going to bear some initial pain here for hopefully for what's some long-term gain. I think at the farm gate we're going to see higher prices from some equipment, maybe for some imported inputs along the way, and lower prices when we go to the marketplace unless something changes, at least initially. But I think generally we're all standing around looking at each other, seeing what's going to happen.
Yeah. Has it changed any projections you make within the bank as far as have you tended to look at balance sheets and say, well, whatever price we projected, we don't think we can meet that any longer? How are you adjusting?
We still rely on our farmers to provide us the price that they think they're going to get at the market. If it's a crazy number, we'll have a conversation. We'll talk about how we're going to get there. We did have one producer that we deal with locally who has his about 75% of his projected crop price because he thinks there's going to be a drop. And so he went ahead and priced all of that. We'll see.
For those that decide to do that, though, are they locking in break even, or what can they even lock in at this point?
In that case, it was break even. Everybody's cost of production is different. We've talked about that before, and so the producers who locked in their prices far in advance of spring planting looks like that was probably a good move, depending on what happens. In that case, this gentleman did that and felt like he was going to get to break even at those numbers.
With the uncertainty with tariffs, I guess we could say, well, we're uncertain on where interest rates will be. You care to make any predictions on where we might wind up, or is it going to be status quo for a while right now?
For our budgeting cycle for the year, keep in mind we did that last November. We budgeted in 4 25 basis point rate increases for the year. But as we sit now, we're in April, maybe haven't realized any of those. But we thought they're going to happen the second half of the year. And so as we look ahead to sort of the Federal Reserve Board meetings when those take place, one of which is coming up in the end of next week, May 6th and 7th. Wouldn't surprise me if we see a dip at that meeting. That remains to be seen a little bit. I think the big meetings to watch, June and September, those meetings correspond with a summary of the economic projection for the United States. And so oftentimes you learn more about which way the Fed is leaning at those meetings than you do the interim meetings. And so I would encourage agricultural producers to keep your eye on those Fed meetings and read about those and see what they're saying. In particular, leading up to the meetings, as Jerome Powell often make appearances and hinting what could happen.
But when you made those projections as the bank last November, you were expecting rate increases because you thought inflation, or that we would
No,
need to.
we were expecting rate decreases.
Oh, rate decreases. Okay, I wanted to make sure of that.
Yep.
Okay,
I
so
may
you were
have
looking at,
misspoke. Those
yeah,
four decreases.
okay, so you were looking at 4 rate decreases throughout the year, and you would still think that maybe we'll have one then here in May, perhaps.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me necessarily. There's been a ton of volatility in the market, which doesn't always give us an indication of what's going to happen. There's a lot of friction between the Fed and what the administration's up to right now, so that's kind of a wild card. Everything's a wild card in DC at the moment, but we're keeping our eye on it, and we still think we're going to have some decreases this year. And as such, we've stayed pretty short on a lot of money that we're accessing.
Yeah, that's a good word there. There's some friction, isn't there,
There
between
is.
the administration and the Federal Reserve? Yeah. Well, how does that influence then how you deal with things at the bank as well? There's always, I suppose, uncertainty in markets, but do you feel there's more uncertainty right now? And does that change then what you do on the bank side because of that much more uncertainty?
I don't know if it's more uncertainty, but it's certainly different uncertainty that I've dealt with in my career. It's less predictable along the way because of some of the knee-jerk reactions the market takes to things that happen, or the wrong tweet that gets sent out by an individual, whether that's from DC or a pundit or whomever. Reacting to that, staying the course makes sense for us, and that's what we try to do, is keep our head down. I can control when I say our community, I can control what happens within our bank community here in Middlebury, Indiana. And so outside of that, keeping your blinders on and your nose down to what makes sense for us. And that's making good quality loans to people that we know and do business with. And so we try to do that, and mind our P's and Q's along the way, and try to not only provide good service for our customers, but reliable source of credit, stable deposit base, and then a return for our investors.
Take me outside of agriculture for just a moment, because you do have a broader community and you're in several communities in the region there. Just overall outlook of folks in the economy right now, has it changed much over the last 3 months?
I think overall, we did have a one RV company lay off about 500 folks last week as they consolidated some lines. I think that was a matter of trying to get their supply chain in order and eliminate some things that they don't need to produce going forward. So that's a real concern. That's a major concern when those things happen. So we keep a close eye on our consumer loan portfolio to see that those folks are still making payments on their homes and their cars and things of that nature. On the flip side of that, one of the builders that I work with a lot, a commercial builder here locally who works in the commercial space, is as busy as they've been in 5 years. They've got new orders for steel buildings like crazy. It's hard to get those folks to get a lot of things done. And so, the truth of the matter is probably somewhere in the middle of those two happenings. We feel good overall about the state of the economy. And I think folks are generally optimistic, except for the ones who have lost their jobs along the way.
You mentioned the steel buildings. So is that commercial? Is that ag? What are you seeing in that space?
That's almost exclusively commercial manufacturing or warehouse space.
And what is driving that then? That's companies that are continuing to try to expand, or what are they doing?
Yeah, it's growth. Growth is driving that. So a lot of them are additions for warehouse space. So some of them are certainly a play on getting some space up so they can get some imports in before some of these tariffs take effect as well, specifically in the steel and aluminum space. Those folks are trying to get raw material in the door.
So in the time we have left, tell me about what's on your mind. What are the biggest concerns, challenges, whether it's for the bank or for the customers that you serve right now?
Yeah, definitely. Monetary policy is top of mind, and figuring those things out, trying to determine where these interest rates are really going to go. And oftentimes the end user of credit doesn't realize that sometimes banks, we have to go borrow money too. And so we're borrowing from the Federal Home Loan Bank or a banker's bank or something of that nature. And so those interest rates certainly impact our bottom lines as well. And so trying to keep that spread in place that we need to keep the lights on in a market like this. Our bank continues to grow, and as such, we're looking at some geographical expansion, and that keeps me busy along the way. But as far as what keeps me up at night, it's those unknowns and what could happen down the road.
You mentioned there that you're expanding. I was curious in what you see from the community banking side of things. We have been in an environment the last couple of years where we've not seen a lot of community banks sell. Are we headed into a place in which some community banks will be more aggressive in trying to grow, or what do you see in your part of the world?
So just over the last 7 to 10 days, there's probably been 3 or 4 merger announcements in the community banking space. Not necessarily in the Midwest. The one this morning was in Arkansas and Texas. And so there's certainly been an uptick in that. We just completed a banking examination, which we do every 18 months. And while we're exempt from this, the examiners alluded to the fact that there are some community banks around the country who are suffering some earnings issues and trying to stay ahead of that. And so when there's earnings issues, there often will follow a period of consolidation. And so I think you're going to continue to see a little bit of consolidation, maybe not at the pace we did sort of pre-COVID, but it's yeah, I've seen an uptick just very, very recently in those things.
Do you feel there's more opportunity now for community banks in the ag sector? We can go to a variety of places, of course, to get loans. So how is that shaking out among the community banks, the farm credit and the larger banks and so forth? Or is it pretty much status quo in your mind?
I think it depends who your lender is. If it's someone who has proven that they stay the course with farm loans and through the test of time, those banks are going to be still lending to farmers next week and next year. If it's someone who recently jumped into the ag space, and by recent, over the last 5 years when it was pretty easy, I think some of them are going to be looking to exit or limit their exposure to agriculture along the way. So I think those banks who have some hay seeds in their shoes, if you will, as we like to say, I think they're going to be fine and probably pick up some clients along the way.
How do you keep a good staff to be able to do that? Because you need the right people in the right chairs to be out there working with farmers to keep that business coming into the community bank.
Frankly, it's getting more and more difficult all the time to find lenders who understand agriculture. We're fortunate that we just picked up a new college graduate in the last 6 months who grew up on a farm. We're sort of teaching him credit now at this point. We just brought back a seasoned lender who had left us for a time and was looking to come back to Northern Indiana, who's a farm boy as well. We're thankful when those fall in our laps, but it definitely is getting tougher and tougher all the time to find that talent you need that understands agriculture.
Well, and you're probably competing against many other folks that would like to have those same people, right?
You are, and frankly, banking hasn't been as sexy as a career option as getting a truck from a chemical or seed company and driving around the countryside and doing those things along the way. We think we offer an awful lot of stability the way we do things, and so we try to find the folks that appreciate that too.
Joe, I always appreciate the time. It's good to see what's going on in your area, and hopefully folks will have a good spring and a good crop season. Even when margins are tight, it's always nice to grow a good crop, that's for sure.
Planting season has started, and we're at the cusp of that, and it's good to see the dust rolling locally.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.